Hi, this is Randy May. Thank you for tuning into my channel. Sure, I love to have as many people as we can look at it. Today we're going to be talking about the relationships in a marriage and sex, and it's part of your life, and a lot of people don't deal with it right, but we do need to deal with things right the way God wants them to be. One important thing about a relationship and a marriage is our relationship with God. We both, the husband and the wife, need to have a relationship with God, and they also need to have a relationship together with God. There's nothing more important in a marriage. Our friendships, when we're dating, will grow into love, and then we do it a proper way, the way God has. God has an order. He created Adam and Eve, and He created the garden, and God has an order to everything. You must keep Jesus first in your marriage and in your life. God did not design a marriage just to be a man and a woman. He designed them to be a man, a woman, and God. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were together, and they were ordained to God and put together. Matthew chapter 19, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. It's not just you and your wife. God has to be in the equation for a good marriage. When you put God in your marriage, you have the potential for change. You have the opportunity to have victory in your marriage, and you increase your success in your marriage by having God be part of your marriage. Now we need to develop a friendship in our marriage. And there comes a time in your marriage when you may say that, oh, I'm in love, but we're just not best friends anymore. Well, things have come in your way. 2 reasons why friendships fail in marriage. One is issues that were created when you were dating, and the problems and troubles you had before you got married. There are 3 problems that comes and trouble that comes when you get married. One is becoming sexual too soon. God made sex for marriage. He didn't make it for outside the marriage. And so you have to realize when you're dating, it's not a time to get to know their body. It's a time to get to know the person on the inside. But sex is for marriage. I've seen so many people destroy their lives because they had premature sex before they got married, and it created a lot of problems. And one quick example, I know a young couple that the woman got pregnant, and they weren't married, and then he decided he didn't want to get married. Now they got a real problem. If they would have waited to have sex after marriage, they wouldn't have had a big problem. And it created a problem because when the baby was born, Daddy didn't want to be around much, so he's going to be raised by a father that wasn't his birth father, and that creates problems for the children also. Dating is get to know each other emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and socially, and we get to know their families. In other words, the wife gets to know her potential husband's family, he gets to know his potential wife's family, they get to know each other. There's a lot of things you need to know about a family. And I've had a lot of people say, well, I'm not marrying her family. You got the wrong outlook on life. Their family's going to be involved, all right? So you need to know her family. If her sister is a nut job, if her mother is a nut job, if her brother's a nut job, the nut don't fall too far from the tree. Wouldn't that be nice to know that in advance? Or the man, it can be the other way. I'm not picking on women. I'm just saying you need to get to know their family, because there is a day coming, they're all going to come to your house for a barbecue in the yard, and the crazy uncle and all the problems and the baggage that her family has is going to be come visiting you. And so you need to know these things to see if you want to tackle this job and take that on, and see if you want to live your life that way. Your presence toward your future father-in-law and mother-in-law plays an important part. The wife will want you to love her parents, and you want her to love your parents. So you need to get to know each other. And if you have trouble in a relationship, and the mother doesn't care and the father doesn't care and they offer no help at all in the marriage, and I'm talking about money, I'm talking about you're having emotional issues, you're having problems, they want their children to succeed. But if they don't and they're not involved and they don't want to help when you have a problem, then you've got even a bigger problem, because especially if they're Christians, they ought to want to pray for you and maybe offer some advice. Maybe they've been married 25 or 30 or 40 years. They could offer a lot of stuff that you don't know about because you haven't been married. When you marry them, you don't just get the whole family. You get the crazy uncle and everybody that's involved in the family. Same way with her. She gets what's involved. So you need to know the families. You need to get to meet them. You need to get around them so you know what you're getting yourself into. And I've had numerous people sit before me in counseling over the years I pastored and preached, and they'd say, well, I had no idea that his dad was an alcoholic and that he used to drink real heavy. I had no idea that his sister was, all that. Well, you should have known those things. If you got to know each other, you would have known these things and found them out. It's very important in a relationship to talk to each other and to be observant when you meet the family members. Dating is a time to get to know each other and their families, and not about their body or about sex. Now, if you're going to marry a person that's a pathological liar, wouldn't it be good to know that before you marry them? That if their lips are moving, they're lying? Have you ever met anybody like that? I know I have over the years. Preaching for 47 years in over 75 or 80 different churches of all faiths, pastoring 22 years, being an interim pastor at 3 churches. I've met some people that profess to be Christians that were pathological liars, and you couldn't believe anything they were saying. So it's nice to know that if you're going to marry somebody, are they really a good person deep down, and they're not snowing you? A good thing to do is to get to know each other. Especially, now we live in a society where a lot of people are meeting on the internet. And if you meet somebody on the internet, you need to check them out thoroughly. Before you get too attached to a person, let's say it's a woman. She's looking on the internet and she finds a guy on a dating site or whatever, and you go out with him and you kind of like him and you want to go out with him again. That's right when you ought to run a background check on him. You say, well, that's crazy. No, it isn't. Because if you wait till you fall in love with him, if he's a convicted whatever, felon, if he's written a bunch of bad checks and never picked them up, if he just filed bankruptcy last year, he's got 4 or 5 bill collectors chasing him, and they've got a garnishment on his wages, you don't know any of that. But if you do a background check, you may find a lot of that out. I have had people that run a background check on my advice. I told them to do it, and they found out things they could not believe. And I'm telling you, some of them were pretty bad. I'm talking about extensive criminal records and moving from one state to the other and everything else. Wouldn't it be better to find that out after one date before you go on the second one than to fall in love with them and you're getting ready to get married, and then you either don't find out, you find out after you get married, or you do it then and you're already in love with them, so you try to overlook their faults, all their problems. Some people bring baggage into marriage. And if they're bringing baggage in, you need to know how much baggage is coming in and what kind of baggage is it. If they're facing criminal charges, you might want to think this over until everything's straightened out. If they've got an extensive criminal record, you might want to think about it, If they've written a bunch of bad checks and got a garnishment, like I said, these are things that you need to find out if you're going to date someone you don't know. Now, if you live in a town where you've known this person, maybe not real close, but you know them, you went to school with them, or you've known them at church since they was a teenager or whatever, well, you pretty much know what kind of person they are and everything. But if somebody you've never met before and you're going out with them, you go out with them. If a date doesn't work out and you don't like them or they don't like you, nothing ventured, nothing gained, no problem. But if you like them and you want to go out a second time, before you get attached to them, before you get ready to fall in love with them, then you want to do a thorough background check on that person. You don't have to tell them you did it, and look it up. And if they've got all sorts of baggage and you don't like the kind of baggage they have, you can just cancel the second date and say, boy, that was the best 30 or 50 bucks I spent to run a background check on them. And so I know that sounds terrible, but in this day and age we live in, folks, you can't be too careful. And we need to realize that when you meet somebody, it depends on if you know them and you've known them for a long time, or if you don't know them at all. And so you need to be careful. We should take pre-marriage counseling and do an inventory of what we expect in a marriage. I would advise that. I had a church where had a church home, and I was out evangelizing. When I wasn't preaching, went to my home church. They said, "Would you do us a favor?" I said, "What do you need?" I usually filled in for them on Sunday when they went out of town or on vacation or whatever. Probably 5 to 7 Sundays a year I filled in. Church ran about 175 to 225 people. Nice sized church for a town, a small town. And I was filling in for them, and they said, "Well, would you counsel some people for us? We've got a lot of stuff going on, and they're getting ready to get married, and they need premarital counsel." So I said, "Okay, I'll do it for you." So when I met with them, they acted very, upset, like they didn't want to talk to me. And so I try to be nice. I try to start off with softball questions to see where we were going here and what we were going to do. And the woman crossed her legs and did this with her arms. And look at she, man, I don't know what her name was, but say it was Betty. I said, "What's wrong, Betty? What's upsetting? Have I upset you? We've only been talking for a minute and a half here." And she goes, "We don't need any counseling." I said, "Oh." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I can't believe that the church is ordering us to take counseling." And I said, "Well, I'm not really counseling you a whole lot. We're just going to talk about marriage and what you both expect out of a marriage and all that." And that's about as far as I got. And she said, "Listen, I already know about marriage. I've been married 3 times." I said, "Oh." And then he said, "I've been married 3 times too. This will be our 4th marriage. We know all about marriage." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, let me tell you something. If you went to get your driver's license and you took the test and failed, and then you took the test again and failed, then you took the test again and failed, do you think maybe you might want to hire a professional to teach you how to drive, and you need to do some more studying on the books so you can pass the test? Quite obvious you don't know what you're doing. You failed 3 times." And then they got upset at me because I said that. They said, "Well, you're telling us we're failures." I said, "I never said you were a failure. I'm just telling you, if you've been married 3 times and divorced 3 times, and this is going to be your 4th marriage, it's quite obvious that you really don't know much about marriage and what it takes in a marriage." And so they were pretty much done at that point. And I told the pastors, they said, "You kidding me?" I said, "No." I said, "You threw me under the bus." I said, "Those people were mad at me when they walked in the door. I didn't even open my mouth." And so anyway, things like that happens. You need to realize I'm not making fun of them. I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm just telling you that sometimes we have a preconceived idea of what we think marriage should be about, but we need to find out what the Word of God has to say about marriage and what the Lord wants you to do in marriage, and we need to include God into the equation, and you don't need to get into sex prior to marriage. Now, I know that some people don't like to hear that, and that we live in a liberal society and all that, but I'm just trying to tell you, Jesus Christ is the same today, yesterday, and forever. And so if you want to discern God's will for your relationship in your marriage, you have to pray and talk to the Lord, and you and your potential wife or potential husband need to get together and pray and say, maybe we ought to talk to the pastor, maybe we ought to take a little counseling just to see whether you're compatible and whether there's certain things you need to fix before you get married. Now, we do see a lot in society where people are getting married and they have her kids, his kids, and then pretty soon they're going to have their kids, and they've got a blended family, and some of them are here half the time, some are somewhere else half the time, and it puts a strain on the marriage sometimes. And they thought, well, I've had people tell me, I thought it would be easier than this. It's very difficult because his ex is not cooperating. Then he says her ex is not cooperating, and it causes problems. You need to fix things up front before you get married and take care of the baggage that comes into it. And sometimes that means we need to sit down and talk about finances before you get married. If you love someone, you need to work out a financial plan. How much does she make? How much do you make? How long has she been on the job? How long have you been on the job? What's your obligations right now? Do you have a car payment? Are you renting? or if you bought a property, you need to work out the financial condition also prior to marriage, not just wing it after you get married and find out you don't have enough money, or find out that the person you're marrying owes $35,000 worth of charge card debt on 7 different cards and they're chasing them for the money. This is stuff that does happen. Believe me, it does happen. I seen one that was over 100 grand on charge cards, and it was a mess. And so she was like, wow, I don't carry any charge card balance. And she dotted her I's and crossed her T's. He couldn't even make his checkbook out. I mean, it looked like a little kid had scribbled all over it and everything else. And he never knew what he had in the bank, and he was in bad financial thing, 2 payments behind on his car. And I told that woman right in front of him, I said, look, you're very organized, he's not. You're financially stable, he's a shipwreck. You need to work this out before you get married, because quite obvious you don't like that. And he just says, I don't know, I just spend my money and this and that. He really don't care, he don't have a budget or anything. It's going to cause problems in your marriage. Better nip it in the bud, as Barney Fife would say, and get it taken care of up front. You need to clarify your roles and responsibility in your marriage. And that means, what are you going to do when you get home from work? Now, I had 2 or 3 couples that got really into it. Their big problem was over the house cleaning and taking care of the home. The wife says, I work a full-time job. He works a full-time job. I come home, he goes in, kicks his shoes off, gets in front of the TV. He never does anything around the house. He don't help me with anything. Matter of fact, I even cut the grass. And so I asked him, I said, well, what are you doing? And he goes, well, I'm tired when I come home. I said, she works too. Yeah, but she works in the office. I work outside. I said, well, I got news for you. 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, it's still working. You can't let your wife do everything. You've got to do something. You need to share in the duties. Boy, you'd have thought I asked him to give me his paycheck. He really got very resentful. And he goes, I thought men stuck together. I was like, whoa. I said, listen, if you're both married, I said, at home, I'm married. All right. And at that time, I was not only preaching, but I was the general manager of a car dealership with 44 employees. And I told him, when I come home, during the week, I vacuum, I take the trash out, I cut the yard, I weed eat, I empty the dishwasher, and I do the laundry. My wife does all the cleaning of the kitchen. She does the dishes. She does the vacuuming. She does the dusting. She does all sorts of things around the house. We split the load and carry it because she works and I work. If you both work and you both have to jump in. I've seen marriages come apart because they could not settle on who was going to clean what, and the woman was tired of doing everything. I did have only one, where the man was doing almost everything. The wife wasn't doing nothing, and she wasn't even employed. He was, she wasn't. And he come home to a mess, supper wasn't ready, he'd have to cook supper himself and all that. Caused a lot of problems in marriage. If they'd have worked all this stuff out before they got married, then it would have been much easier and they wouldn't have had the problems they had. So we need to realize that troubles and problems come sometimes because we ignore them. And you want to get a hold of somebody and just shake them sometimes and say, listen, look at your marriage, what's going on, and realize that, a marriage license is more than a piece of paper on the wall. Now, I've heard men tell women that, just a piece of paper on the wall, why don't we live together? We don't need to get married, just a piece of paper on the wall. Well, if it's just a piece of paper on the wall, what are you scared about? Why don't you want to make a commitment? Why don't you want to get married? If it's just a piece of paper on the wall, what are you worried about? Well, he's worried because he don't want to make a commitment. And then I've had women tell me, well, he said he quit dating me if I didn't give him sex. And I really love him and I don't want to lose him. We're supposed to get married. If he's putting you in that position to where you must sleep with me while we're not married so that we can keep together and all that, and if you don't, I'm going to leave you, then he's not worth anything. You need to shake the dust off and tell him, hit the road, Sam, go on your way, be out of here. He's not worth it. You're wasting your time on him because that is not right. A man should not try to force a woman into having sexual relations when they're not married. It goes against God's laws, it goes against God's word, and it's not right to throw a woman like that. And then the guy told me, he said, well, nobody wants to buy a pair of shoes if they don't try them on. And I said, well, nobody wants to buy a used pair of shoes either. So, and I even had some men equate the woman they were going to marry to a cow. Why buy the cow when you're getting the milk free? And that was very hurtful to me. It brought a little sternness from me when he said that. And I said, you're referring to the woman you're supposed to be the love of your life. You're going to get married and you call her, refer her to a cow, and that she's not putting out to you, so you're not going to marry her if she doesn't? I said, you're a despicable person. And I turned and looked at her right in the face and said, you need to dump this guy and move on with your life. He's not marriage material. This guy's not marriage material. And when I said that, he goes, well, I don't even want to get married, but she insists we do. It's just a piece of paper on the wall. So, take that for what it's worth. But how many red flags do you need to wave in front of you before you get married to tell you got a problem there and you need to nip it in the bud? So when you get married, you need to have a lot of things worked out before you get married. That's what dating's for. While you're dating, you're laying a foundation for your marriage. And if the foundation's not strong and it isn't being built by both parties, your marriage is going to crumble. It's going to crumble. It's just a matter of time. You need to take time and hear what I'm saying here, ladies. If a man is trying to force you into sex before you get married, he's not worth marrying. If he respected you and loved you like he should, and he's really wanting to be a good husband, he wouldn't do that to you. He wouldn't throw you under the bus like that. I'm not going to, some people just aren't going to husband material. And some of them, I had that one guy, he was coming over to our house. He wasn't staying all night. He was coming over there. All he did was lay on the couch, eat, drink, everything. And then he lost his job. And then he lost his car. So he'd drive her car, drive her to work. And then he'd go back to her house, eat her food, lay on her couch, and just lay there and be a bum. Then he'd go pick her up at night and bring her home. And when they come in the door, he'd ask her, what are you going to cook for supper? And so she told me about all this, and I called him in and I said, you're wanting to get married, right? Yeah. I said, well, here's the deal. You need to get out and find a job. You need to prove this woman you really love her. You're going to be responsible, and you've had your car repossessed. You've lost your job, and you're sitting around all day just eating on her couch and loafing, and you're not good marriage material. And I said, I'm not going to marry you. You might get somebody else to do it, but I'm not going to. You need to get things straightened out. And thank God she eventually woke up from the ether and finally did something before they got married, because it wasn't going to work out. You can't work together if you can't communicate to each other, and you don't want to lay a foundation for your marriage and build it the right way. Don't allow anyone to bring bad things to you, and don't allow them to compromise your beliefs and your value systems that God's put in you and you as a Christian have. Don't allow people to devaluate what you're worth. Don't allow them to do things to you. But, it is what it is. Some people just really rush into it and they don't think anything about it, or they're, too young or whatever. But I'm telling you, before you get married, you need to know the person and their family and their background before you marry them. Living together before marriage. I run into this a lot. It's common in our culture. It's a toxic relationship, and it's hazardous, and it increases your odds of not staying married by getting married, because you are living together and you're not married. In America, 41% of women between the age of 18 and 44 have lived together with a guy before they got married. Almost 50% of people that get married have lived together before they got married, when you include men also, and it many times doesn't work out. You may not believe this, but I've read surveys over the years where people that lived together broke up at a faster rate, and more people broke up than they did when they were married, because they were living together. Why? Because there's no commitment. God's not involved. You're not building a proper foundation. You're starting off on the wrong foot immediately. You're sinning and doing what God doesn't want you to do, and you think it's going to work out and be great, and it doesn't. by because they don't want any commitment. They don't want to commit to God. They don't want to commit to you. It doesn't matter what age you are or who you are. That's just the way it is. Now, every year they take a survey and it tells how many people get divorced. Last one I read, 46% of everybody got a divorce, and 54% didn't. But those 54% die someday. So there's two ways out of a marriage: divorce or death. 100%. 46 divorce, 54 you're going to die. And I had an old man tell me one time when his grandson got married, and he said, when you said death, till death do we part? I said, yeah. He goes, now they got a goal to work towards. And I thought that old man, I know he was just joking, but anyway, we have to realize when you get married, it should be for life. You should do everything you can to work things out. But if you build the proper foundation and you do things right from the get-go, then the marriage has a better chance of surviving because you don't have all these unequal things going on in your life. The guy not working or the woman doing this, or you guys got family problems and all that. You can nip a lot of that in the bud if you do it properly, the way God intended for you to do things. A lot of people want the rights of marriage, but they just don't want the commitment of marriage. And they don't want to make a commitment to God. They don't want to make a commitment to the spouse. All research shows that living together is a bad deal because so many people, three things that happen when you live together, and you create to try to create a stable relationship, but it degrades if you don't do it the way God wants you to do it. When you live together and you're intimate before you get married, it causes real problems, and we need to stop that. There's more abuse outside of marriage than there is in marriage. Women who are married are safer emotionally, physically, and financially than women that aren't married because the man will withhold funds, usually him, not always. Sometimes it's the woman. They'll withhold funds. It's my pay. This is my money. That's your money. I'm not paying your bills. And they bicker and fight. When you're married, you have one money. Everybody puts their money in together and pools their resources, and they don't lie to each other. And people that live together, most of the time, women contribute 70% of the money to pay bills and run a home when they're living together. The guy usually puts in about 30%. Now, I know that's not everybody. I'm just telling you the average from surveys they've taken. When you're living together and not married, the woman almost always comes out on the short end of the stick financially, which means, ladies, you need, when you marry a guy like that, or when you live with a guy like that, you've got one more kid to take care of. It's another kid because let's face it, men at 21 years old and a woman at 21, usually the woman is more mature at 21 than the man is. Us guys, we never get done playing with toys. We just buy more expensive toys. And I've seen men in their 40s, 50s, even their 60s go out and blow things up at 4th of July and do all sorts of risky things and everything else, or take a car and they'll chop it up and cut it and take it out in the mud and drive it and flip it. And all the women don't do stuff like that, but men are kind of different, you know. We need to realize that we need to work on our marriage. If a man is living with you, you're more prone to being abused. And if you have children, it even goes up triple that of being abused. So you need to take that in consideration when you're talking about getting married. Marriage is just more than just going before a preacher and getting married, or a justice of the peace, whatever you do. It's more than that. Marriage is very, very important, and we need to realize that God has a plan for marriage, and the plan is that you marry someone you love and you do not have premarital sex. You don't live with them before you get married. Let's see if we're compatible. I got news for you. If you want to live with her and you're insistent on it and you want to have sex before you get married, you're not marriage material. And same thing, other way around, woman. You know, you need to take that for the real thing it really is. If a woman moves in with a man, she has 33 times greater for abuse than if she's married to a man. And that ought to tell you something about laying a proper foundation for a marriage. When God says don't do it, he means don't do it. And God wants the man to protect the woman, to put his arm around her and tell her he loves her, and that she come out of his rib. She's not under his feet for him to walk on. She's not shorter than him so he can tower over her and take control over her. He should love her, and he should treat her like he wants to be treated, and that's what people ought to do. So when you get married, you should love each other, and you should already have things worked out financially, spiritually, physically. You've done everything you possibly can to make the marriage a success. If you're not going to do these things, then you ought not to get married. You need to be honest with each other. You need to find someone that wants to be married and someone that wants a proper relationship, somebody that wants to build a good foundation. They want to serve God, and they want to make you happy, and they want to do things for you. Now, I'm not trying to paint myself out as a great guy, but I can only talk about me on some things. And this is from me. When I was dating my wife, I used to go over to her house early because I went to work before she did. I worked in a factory, and we started at 7:30, and I had to leave my house at 6:45. She worked in an office 9 to 5. So I go by her house, which was out of my way, and I always stick a note underneath her wiper blade on her car, because I wrote her a note every morning. Sometimes I put a flower in there. Sometimes I put a card there. Every day I did something. I went by there and did it. Then, I've always been particular about my cars. I wouldn't let nobody drive my cars. Nobody drove. My mom never drove my car. I kept my car as clean as a whistle. I worked in the car business for 25 years as a manager, and I kept my cars immaculate, still do. Whenever I want to sell one of my cars, within 72 hours after I tell everybody, I don't put it in the paper. I don't put it on the internet. I just tell people I'm going to sell my car, and it's gone, because everybody knows how I take care of it. Rotate the tires every other oil change. I buy the tires when they're needed. I do the proper maintenance, change all over 4,000 miles, depending on the driving situation. And I keep my cars, I wash my cars 3 to 4 times a week, even in the winter. Wax my car at least 10 or 12 times a year, hand wax. And so I take care of my cars, take pride on them. And so I had my first brand new car. I never owned a brand new one. And it was a 78 Oldsmobile Omega SX. And it had the bucket seats, the automatic in the floor, color key wheels. It was a sharp looking car. And I come home one day with a 69 Buick. And my mom, when I got out of the car, she goes, "Where's your car?" I said, "I swapped with Debbie. I told her to drive mine until we get married." I told Debbie to drive my car for a while. She said, "You're getting married." I said, "I haven't asked her yet." She said, "You're going to marry her." I said, "Why?" She goes, "You letting her drive your car. Nobody's ever drove your car in your entire life. You don't let people drive your car." And I said, "Well, yeah, you're right. I'm in love with her. I am going to ask her to marry me." And I put her in my car. Why? Because I loved her. I wanted her to have, not that her car wasn't good. It was a good car. It ran good. It was a Buick Skylark 2-door with a vinyl top and black interior, black top, gold car, good looking car. But I gave her mine because mine was a 78 and it was in great shape also. And I wanted her to drive a good car. And from that point on, I've always kept my wife in a real good car. Of course, being in the business for 25 years, I bought and sold over 12,000 cars at the auction, so I could get cars anytime I wanted. And so I always kept her in a nice car. Why? Because I love my wife. I want her to drive a nice car. I want her to have a reliable car. I want her to be taken care of. If you love your wife, you're going to want to do things for her. If your husband, or your potential husband especially, doesn't do special things for you, doesn't buy you flowers or ever give you candy or do unusual things to make you happy, you might want to look at all those red flags. If he really loved you, he'd want to do things for you. If you're going to get married, you need to work and be honest with one another. Find someone that wants to be married, somebody that wants to be with the Lord and wants to go to the church with you and wants a wife to be a good Christian wife. Ladies, the number one thing a man wants is a good wife. The number one thing that a woman wants is a good husband and somebody that will be good to them and kind to them and do things the way God had planned. And so we need to realize that God wants us to do things in His way, the way the Bible tells us, a man and a woman. And we need to realize that we need to spend the proper time together and get to know one another. And we need to realize that we love one another really good before you get married and you give someone your life and turn it over to Him. I'll wrap this up here. Making a marriage is hard work, but it's worth it. It's worth it because if you're married to somebody you love and they love you, it's a wonderful thing. When you're down, they can lift you up. When they're down, you can lift them up. You can enjoy things together. You can have good times together. And so we need to realize, don't allow things to creep in your marriage and hurt your marriage, like working too many hours, have invasive in-laws that just won't stay out of your business, like Raymond and his parents that lived across the street. You know, you need to have a healthy marriage, and you need to keep people at an arm's length if possible. Financial issues need to be worked out. Stress, you're going to have stress in a marriage at times. Spiritually, you need to be compatible, and that really means a whole lot, being able to be compatible. And you don't want to wake up one day and say, God, who does this person I married? Who am I married to? You need to be married to who God wants you to have. I hope this has been helpful to you. I may do a follow-up on it. I love you all. I appreciate you. Could you click like on this? And could you join my page? I would really appreciate it. It would be wonderful to have you join, and click the little bells so that you'll get updates when I make new videos. We're going to be making all sorts of videos about many things. Thanks for your time. This time, till next time, so long.